welcome independent researcher Howdie Mickoski. How are you, dude?
Hi guys, I'm a little tired. The time zone difference is it's kind of late out here in Norway where I am. So if the people are watching and I sound like I'm taking a few extra seconds to come up with an answer, that's why.
Dude, it's reality. And I think it can lead us into what you were talking. What are some of the things we want to talk about? Is like how much of history is real, and how much do they use history to create texture in this reality that we live in right now?
Yeah, we can take this a couple of sort of overviews first, and then you guys take it where you want to take the conversation. But yeah, two real parts to it. I mean, one is it doesn't matter what subject you choose to dig into, you're going to find that probably it's not true. So it doesn't matter whether it's right science, history, religion, government, commerce, or whatever. It's not based on anything. I mean, there is something factual way at the bottom of it, but it's covered with so much garbage that you have to do a lot of work to even find it to start with. So you've got that issue. History is important because it's the one of the fundamental things of why people do what we do today. It's the explanation of we have this kind of government, we use this kind of thing called money, we drive these cars, we have these airplanes, this is how we treat men and women. It's all because we can say, here's the historical story of how we were here, and that's why we are now. Oh, that makes sense to me. Okay, so it's part of just a creation of a story to explain why we are where we are. So if you control the story, actually, you're not controlling the past, you're controlling the present, because you're controlling the thought patterns and the actions of the people in the day-to-day moment. So that's why the control of history and the presentation of it a particular way is so important. Now we had a second piece that we can take for history, and that is somebody. I think it was when I did a thing with Jay Widener a while ago. We did a thing on the World's Fairs and simulations, and he told me that there had been an article written somewhere that somebody said, if you were building a simulation, or the way you would know you were living in a simulation is if you had no problem digging into the present and the future, but if you look into the past, into history, it's going to be sketchy. It's going to be very hard to explain. There's going to be lots of empty holes. And the reason for that being is if someone's building a simulation, they have to put their energy and their focus on the present and the future, because that's where the simulation started and where it's going. You're going to put less into its past, into the thing that's there. You want the video games characters to what's coming along. That's where you have to put the key stuff in. The background to the character, you're going to leave that sketchy. And he said, this article said that's one way you're going to know you're living in a simulation, because history won't make a lot of sense. And so you put these two things together, it's starting to tell us we've got a combination of it's telling us we have possibly a simulated reality, and it's telling us we've got a controlled reality, because if we could easily see the truth of our history, nobody would be living the way we're living right now. We'd be living a completely different life.
I
Because
completely
we
agree with
live
that as well.
life because of the type of history we are presented from very small children.
And they use history as a program, which then in turns create the filter in which how you see your reality. Yep. They are trying to control how you perceive the world around you through a programmed filter.
Right, and the number one program is the people of the past were really dumb, primitive savages who didn't have washing machines, didn't have televisions, didn't have cars. Boy, were they stupid. They had all of these crazy ideas, and don't think about them. Don't look into the past. It's just you're great now, and you came from these poor these poor people, as opposed to if you start bringing up the real historical stuff we have, particularly the buildings and the structures and the architecture and the statues and the stonework and whatever else, and you see we can't do this stuff today. It's impossible. It cannot be done. Or to do it, we need the most intricate modern machinery. And what we're missing is the fact that it's the opposite. Humans at one time were unbelievably advanced and powerful and had an incredible mind and heart and ability and a connection with the world and with nature and with energy. And as long as people don't know that, they're not going to try to pull that back into the world again themselves. It's okay to be a dumbed down version of a human rather than the complete total version of a human that these ancient, particularly ancient cultures, but even not that far back, the history shows us humans were lived in a very different, powerful way. And that's the big thing that's being kept out of our modern world.
Hey, Howdy, when do you think they changed? When do you think they changed history? Like, if we had to go through the timeline of like from zero to 2001, when was it they got a hold of it?
I will say, yeah, good question. If I had to make this speculation, I think things were started in the what we know as the 1700s, and of course the whole time thing is hard to figure out anyway. But that's when I think the first rewritings of things were slowly started, but the main element of it happened between 1850 and 1900. So in this time when the world fairs were going on that I wrote about in my book, what I realized, one of the big things that these fairs were doing were giant historical theme parks. I mean, like literally you were talking about Disneyland on steroids for the history areas. And I think they were presenting a brand new narrative. And when you have no television and you have no movies and you have no radio, the best way to present a narrative into people's minds is to have these giant fairs, send them all over the world, tell the same story, the same message about whether it's ancient Rome, whether it's dinosaurs, whether it's about what happened in the Middle Ages, what happened at the Battle of Waterloo, like whatever. And you just say over and over and over again. And of course, the people coming to these fairs are richer people. The poor couldn't come to these fairs. So it's all your school teachers are going to go, your university professors are going to go, the people who have higher educated jobs are going to go. So they're just going to say, hey, I just went to the World's Fair and I got to see gladiators fight in the Colosseum and I got to see what happened in ancient Rome. Well, you got to trust them. It was the World's Fair. World's Fair's got to know what's going on. And the person has just experienced it. They haven't read it in a book. They experienced it. You know, the World's Fair in St. Louis, we can go into real detail how crazy these fairs were, but I'll give you an example. They had 22 historical exhibits at the fair. Each one needed approximately 2,000 to 3,000 actors, 2,000 to 3,000 actors in order to think of the scale we're talking here. So the streets of Jerusalem were one exhibit. 22 streets of Jerusalem, 22 were recreated. They recreated the Holy Sepulchre, the manger where Jesus is supposed to be born. They've got this, they've got that. And they brought over 3,000 people from Israel or I guess it wasn't Israel then, right? From Jerusalem at the time, to be actors in the cafes, in the restaurants, in the whatever. And this was continuous. They had the Siberian Railroad. You would get on a railway car and they would, of course, shake the railway car and then they'd move the scenery behind you. And then the 2,000 actors would change clothes. You'd open the doors and you'd be at one stop somewhere on some city on the Siberian Railroad. And you'd do whatever you do there. You get back on the car would shake, the scenery would go again. The actors would change the clothes and you'd be in another city and another city and another city. And apparently this was so well done, you would almost think you really did just take a trip on the Siberian Railroad. And this, so you got ancient Rome, you've got Jerusalem, you've got the Siberian Railroad, you've got the German Alps, you've got France in the Middle Ages, you've got Spain in the time of something else, you've got the Italian Renaissance, you've got all of this stuff. What a perfect way to present a historical narrative to the world's population.
Sounds just like
that's exactly when it happened. So imagine that as a historical narrative. So you've got two things going on with these fairs. So I'll explain what the fairs were in a second, but you've got one of the big parts of the historical exhibit. Then you've got the human zoo. The human zoos were really important, where they brought primitives from all over the world, and you could go see Zulus and various native Indian tribes, and you could see Aboriginals from Australia and primitives from the Philippines. And they wanted to make sure they were shown as savage and primitive as possible. At the Buffalo Fair, they forced the native Indians to go in the Coliseum and kill 700 dogs and then eat them in front of like 10,000 people, because of course you need to show that these Indians are primitive, and
Oh
you
my
as the
God.
great white Victorian are of course are above these poor, and they would do these, they would have these exhibits where you would go in, I kid you not, the Smithsonian would put up an exhibit with skulls, and they would show various, you know, African skull, Indian skull, skull from Pakistan, all small, and then they would show the Victorian skull, which would be nice and big and round and perfect, and then they would measure your skull, and then they would take your measurements and put them onto the various skulls to see how evolved you were. This is going on at these World's Fairs. This is the kind of indoctrination that's going on. So you've got this part of the fairs, and then you've got the other side of it that we will obviously talk about as well, right? Where you're talking about, so what are these fairs for anyone who doesn't know? Well, you're talking about anywhere from 700 to 1,200 acres of massive buildings being supposedly built with towers and domes and huge construction works and lakes and lagoons and electrical trains, and all built supposedly in 2 years. To have this fair that would last 6 months would lose a ton of money. Every one of these fairs lost millions of dollars. And then as soon as it was done, they bring in the dynamite, blow the thing up, and throw it into landfills and go on to the next city and do it again. So what the hell is that? When you add this idea of impossible building times for impossible architecture and then destroy it all. But in the meantime, you have this giant, almost like propaganda machine presented in the middle of it. You've got some really weird stuff going on for about 50 years of our history. And I think to answer that, that's the answer to your question. There is the time frame right about from what we call, what people think of as the Civil War, whatever that is, the US Civil War. That's like the beginning point of the creation of what we know of as everything in our world, not just history. But if you start looking for products and government ideas and scientific ideas and commerce and everything, it all sort of starts to appear in the 1860s, 1870s. That's when it all kind of gets cemented in place as kind of, this is how we do things. Something really weird's going on in this time frame.
Do you suspect that the Civil War is a product of that, or somehow related to that, or is that just incidental, the timing there?
Oh no, it's not incidental. And again, the question you've got to ask is what's really going on there, because you don't have any battle photographs. You have none.
Yeah.
We have photographs of supposed casualties and dead people, but a lot of the dead people don't really look dead in the photographs. They look like they're just actors laying on the ground. So we've got this unknown series of battles that we're not sure. I don't doubt there were some kind of battles taking place, but battles between who and for what, we don't know. We do have pictures of destroyed cities. I mean, like, and these cities, you know, they look like World War II. Like
Atlanta, I mean, just devastated.
Yeah, if you're going into Richmond or Atlanta or any of these cities and you're thinking of taking it over, like, okay, we want to take over the city. Are you going to just destroy the hell out of it like that?
Yeah, not even just take over. They wanted it to rejoin that. It was going to be their country again, the same country.
It's your own country that you want to rejoin. And then the second, but to create the destruction you see, because the destruction is like the marble. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, the South in the United States before whatever the Civil War was beautiful architecture. I mean, it's like ancient Rome, ancient Greece is right there. And so you're talking about marble and granite and beautiful. And this stone is like, it's like sheared in half. It's like, look like a laser's cut it. So how many of these supposed 1860s cannonballs are you going to have to fire at these buildings to create the kind of damage you're going to see? I mean, like with World War II tanks and cannons, it's going to take you a while to create that. So supposedly with this stuff, what are you going to be firing at these buildings for 20 days straight? So the whole story, once you get what little photographic record we have, is already indicating we have a serious problem. Now we can't go further because that's really what we have supposedly photographs from. But you know, it doesn't matter where you go back in history, the story doesn't make any sense once you dig into it. But at least with the photographs, it gets harder to prove. So something in certainly in United States history, the Civil War is a marker point of something before and something after. And what's after is the world we've known and like our parents and our grandparents knew as this reality. That's when it was formed.
Yeah. So when you go into, because I love this World Fair. I mean, it's so mind blowing to me. And you wrote a book on, what's the name of your books? I'm gonna make sure they get all the links to your books because I'm gonna
Yeah.
order this because you just blew my mind.
Yeah, like I said, it just came out with a revised copy of it. It's called Exposing the Expositions, and the new one is, it will be revised 2021 in the title. And yeah, it takes you through the fairs really from 1851 to 1915. After the fair in San Francisco, they had a big change in what the fairs were. But there's so many bizarre elements to this because every city, of course, has a giant fire in it. Like take Chicago. Chicago was a giant fire in 1871, supposedly, right? Burns down the whole city. So they built 700 acres of the Columbian Exposition, destroy the whole thing the year later. But wait a minute, don't they need buildings for supposedly the stuff that's burned down? How about San Francisco, right? San Francisco has a supposed earthquake, which I don't think was an earthquake. I don't even know if anything happened at all. But supposedly their whole city is destroyed. People are still living in tents in 1915, according to the story. They build, again, 1,000 acres of buildings, and as soon as it's done, destroy the whole thing. Well, the city needs buildings. People are living in tents. This would be perfect. So the more you look into the fairs, the stupider they get. It should be a book. So I went to some building contractors that I know, and I took them. These are guys who build, big stuff their whole life. And I took them the photos of like the Chicago Exposition. And I first of all, they went, what the hell is this? And I said, oh yeah, this was built in 1893 in Chicago. And they're like, no, I don't think so. But anyway, so I asked them, I said, could you build this fair today? If I gave you unlimited money, you have unlimited workforce, could you build this? He said, yeah, I could build this for you. He said, how long would it take you? So, well, it's going to take me 2 years for the planning because we got a lot of work to do with the landscaping and the lakes and the lagoons and the water stuff. So 2 years to put all this together, the thinking process. Give me 2 to 3 years to landscape it because we're going to have to dig out, these lakes and these canals and the way this stuff moves. This is a huge engineering project. And then you're moving in all the sidewalks, all the roads. Then the buildings, if I've got 50, 60,000 guys, give me 10 years to build the buildings. So here, this is the Chicago Exposition, for example. This is a small part of it. Look at the scale and the size of this.
Look at that. Think about that, man.
So he told me 15 years with modern machines and an unlimited workforce. Supposedly this is done in 1891 in 2 years. You have like 20 possible theories from, aliens to building it in a parallel reality, whatever. But if you take it down to 2 logical possibilities, you've got A, they did build it in the time frame that they said, which would mean they would need a technology that we have no idea what the technology could be, almost like you'd be 3D printing the stuff out of like 3D print kits, kind of. That would be one possibility. The other possibility would be these must be remnants of, yes, an ancient civilization. And this is now the one I lean more towards, that most of the large buildings, particularly the ones that have a Greek Roman look, were part of a worldwide civilization. And probably the civilization was wiped out. And then the next group of people came in, retook over the cities, repopulated them, had a World's Fair to commemorate, you might say, the new world order. And then all you have to do is build the other stuff, which I mean, I don't doubt that a lot of building took place for these World's Fairs. I'm not saying like, hey, they found the whole World's Fair, like, and they just painted it. No, they found maybe 14 or 15 buildings or something, let's say. And then they did build with plaster and wood, because there's lots of photos of them building smaller structures. There's no construction photos of the big buildings. There's only construction photos of the small buildings, of the smaller things. So they did probably build the rest of the World's Fair, quite honestly. And then when you paint it all the same, with the same kind of paint, the same way, at the same time, how could you tell the difference between what's old and what's new? You've tricked everybody. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing this giant trick of this civilization that was somehow wiped out, and the buildings were reconfiscated, reused. And you can see this in any state in the US. So I'm not sure which states you guys are in, but
Cali.
just go, particularly if you live in the Midwest, just go to your local state capital. Go look at this, like go to Iowa, North Dakota, Oklahoma, whatever. Look at the building. The building is giant. And the dome, of course, will be rivaling St. Peter's in Rome. You know, it's going to be huge. And you'll see the story. They built this in like what, 1840 or something, 1830. And you'll see a photo of it, early photo in 1855. And there's no road. That's the most amazing. You'll see this picture of like, I can't remember if it's the Capitol building of Oklahoma or Nebraska or something. It's like 1860, supposedly just built, massive, but there's no road. So they're building this giant marble structure, just the building of that one thing, the logistics and the equipment and the manpower and the stuff you've got to transport just to build it, but you don't take a couple of days to build a road to make your transportation that much easier. Like, so it's like, you don't have to even look into the past. You can just go and see some of the buildings that are existing right now today in your state and just look at them and go, well, that's impossible. That's impossible for the time.
I guess the one thing is, I'm still fascinated by this connection with the Civil War. What's your thought on people? Because we certainly have records that probably are reliable. You tell me, of people who participated in battles, and like, because it's not that far. It wasn't that long ago. What do you think? Do you have any inkling of what the conflict actually was about? I mean, in your research, do you know?
Short answer. Short answer.
Yeah.
Every city in North America had a giant fire in the 1800s, right? It doesn't matter. You look at Boston, Baltimore, Chicago, Toronto, Seattle, Portland. It doesn't matter. Every single city has this massive fire that burns down most of the city, supposedly because they're all built of wood buildings. But when you look at the photographs, it's all just charred and destroyed stone. Yeah. And not only stone, these cities look like Dresden in 1944, right? Like the first thing my building contractor friend said when I showed him some pictures of the Boston fires, like, well, who bombed this city? So you've got this world, this massive fires that they claim take over the course of 50 or 60. Of course, the cities go through magic rebuilds, right? Seattle rebuilt itself in, I don't know, 6 weeks or something, right? But you have all these fires, and the question becomes, well, what if the fires didn't take place over 100 years, like they say, or 50 years? What if all the fires took place over the course of a year or two? Now what are you talking about? Just coincidental city fires, or some type of gigantic, almost like interplanetary war? So my feeling is what we know of as the Civil War is a tiny little speck, a tiny piece of this much gianter conflict that's going on in that time frame, or is related to whatever that's related to. And maybe the Civil War is the end of it. The Civil War is it's the mop-up operation. The ones who had they hadn't killed everybody off yet, and they had gotten out of the cities, but they were still living in certain areas okay and fine. And so this was the last reconnaissance missions, you might say, to finish that. Here's some fires.
This is Richmond. It looks like Dresden. I mean, it looks like it was carpet bombed.
World War II.
Yeah, that's these are even better, like because Civil War. So you're supposed to say the cities are supposed to look bad because they've been bombed. So put something in like, take Boston Fire, and I don't know if it's 1871 or 1872, just for fun, because I know you get some really good pictures of that one. So Boston Fire is like 1872. There you go. So look at the photos of Boston. Look at these photos. This is supposed to be a fire.
Just mounds of.
Okay, so rubble. Let's get into this. I know this is not your expertise, or maybe it is. So we look at California fires, right? And we're like, all these buildings are supposedly been burned, but they look like they've just exploded, but all the trees are still there.
Trees are still, you'll see that in all the photos too. There's some great ones like of Galveston, Texas, where the buildings look like this, but all the trees and the whatever, they're all fine. So it's telling you something else was going on. So again, this is a more important thing when it comes to history. I don't know. Like unless you have a time machine and you can go back and take video footage, nobody really knows for sure. All we can start to know is what's probably not true. We can dig apart what can't be true. The story that all of these things are just simple fires and they all happen by accident and some goofball way, we know that that's not true. So you've got here's what we've got going on, Johnny, to sort of sum up your question, and we'll maybe end this on this sort of ideas. But okay, so you've got The end of the Civil War has just happened. We've got all of these World's Fairs happening, particularly in the US, all over the place. We've got these city fires happening constantly all over the place. We've got two other weird things happening. You've got orphan trains, right? You've got tens of thousands of these orphans. Where are these orphans coming from? Where are their parents? Nobody knows. Putting them on trains and shipping them out west. So that's, of course, the perfect rebuild. If you're you always rebuild a civilization with young children because they're going to do what they're told and they're going to believe what they're told. And then at the same time, you've got the building of these supposed building or the creation of these giant insane asylums. And I don't know if you've seen some of these insane asylums in the 1880s and 1890s. They're bigger than the Medici Palace in Florence. Like they're castles. They're absolutely massive, like Renaissance castles, and they're everywhere. So one, why have you got so many insane people all the time? Two, why do you need to put them in the most beautiful palace like that the Queen of England lives in? It makes more sense that whatever's just come out of whatever the real history was, you're repopulating it with children or repopulating it with the type of humans you want. And the ones that aren't going to go along with the story, well, they're insane and we need to put them away until they either decide to agree with the story or they just disappear forever.
Is that going to happen today?
There you go. Look at some of these. That's an insane asylum.
So if you don't get the jab,
no, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I thought, dude. It's like, these are going to be insane asylums for people who don't play along.
Yeah, exactly. So once you begin that, and that's why I think this study of this time period was so important, because it's telling us some of what's happening right now. We're talking about a reset. There it was. Whatever a reset was, it was happening in the late 1800s. In their way, in the way it was being set up. The more you understand of how that was done, I think the more you can begin to understand the way this is going to be shaped and played out right now.
So in the 1600s, things begin to change. In the 1800s, it becomes them executing their plan, basically, whoever they may be.
Or maybe I might say, if I had to roll the dice and take a stab at this, I guess, I might say the 1600s was the big change in Europe. So all of this stuff happened in Europe in the 1600s, and then this happened in North America, and what we know of as the 1800s. That would be my guess. Same thing, but just two different time frames, two different parts of the world.